still hear them, the distant drums of war, echoes from a time when brother fought brother, and the fate of a nation hung by a thread. This is the Distant Drums Podcast, history you can march to.
Thanks for tuning in to yet another episode of the Distant Drums Podcast. I'm your host, James, joined always by my co-host, Andrew. And we also have Mr. Ben Quina on again today. Mr. Ben has been on for a few episodes now. We talked about his book, The Invincible 12th, which is a regimental history about the 12th South Carolina Infantry in the Greg McGowan Brigade in the Army of Northern Virginia. And we also had him on. We talked about A.P. Hill at Gettysburg. And Mr. Ben, when his schedule allows, he's going to be on the podcast more frequently. So, Ben, we're glad to have you back. And I know you're chomping at the bit with today's guest on today. So, Mr. Andrew, since you did the legwork, you scheduled this, we'll go ahead and have you introduce our esteemed guest today.
Well, thank you, James. I first and foremost want to say how honored I am to been able to never formally meet Mr. Gary Gallagher, but by email, he's been great to converse with. A little bit about my interaction with, his expertise. We'll call you an expert tonight, Gary. I
do have gray hair, so that works all right.
Hey, perfect. Growing up in a family that had a very strong appreciation for the Civil War and Civil War history. I grew up watching all of the documentaries and the TV shows and movies that came out during the time, and I'm sure the rest of my podcast co-hosts have too, but I was fascinated with the show Civil War Journal, and that's where I saw Mr. Gary Gallagher for the first time, and I can guarantee I probably didn't even know how to walk at the time I first watched it, but just an honor to have you on our show tonight, Gary, and a little brief introduction about him. Gary W. Gallagher received his BA from Adams State College of Colorado in 1972 and his master's in 1977 and PhD in 1982 from the University of Texas at Austin. He began his academic career in 1986 at Penn State University, where he taught for 12 years. In 1998, he joined the faculty of the University of Virginia and held the John L. Now III Professorship in the History of the American Civil War and served as the founding director of the John L. Now III Center for Civil War History. He is the author or editor of more than 40 books, including The Confederate War, Causes Won, Lost and Forgotten, How Hollywood and Popular Art Shape What We Know About the Civil War, The Union War, The Enduring Civil War, Reflections on the Great American Crisis, and The American War, A History of the Civil War Era, which he co-authored with Joan Waugh in 2023. He presented a 48-lecture course on the Civil War for the teaching company, now Wondrium, and has participated in more than 6 television projects in the field. He held the Cavaliers Distinguished Teaching Professorship in 2010 to 12, which is the highest teaching award conveyed by the University of Virginia, and won the Philip Merrill Award for Outstanding Contributions to Liberal Arts Education from the American Council of Trustees and Alumni in 2013. Active in the field of historic preservation, he was president from 1987 to mid-1994 of the Association for the Preservation of Civil War Sites, the forerunner of the Civil War Trust, which we now know as the American Battlefield Trust. So, Gary, thank you so much for hopping on board with us tonight and marching with us on the Distant Drums podcast.
Happy to be here.
Perfect. And I guess we'll just do a start. What got you interested in the Civil War?
Well, I can be very specific about that. I was born in Los Angeles, but my family moved to Colorado when I was young. I grew up on a farm in southern Colorado. And one of my grandmothers gave me a subscription to National Geographic magazine. Mm-hmm. And that magazine had an article anticipating the Civil War centennial in 1961. And it was that copy of National Geographic that first put the Civil War on my radar screen. But what really did it, so I was interested enough in that I bought a copy of the American Heritage Picture History of the Civil War, which has a text by Bruce Catton, which came out in 1960. Mm-hmm. Bought a copy of that. It cost $19.95 and wiped out my life savings at that point. But I got that book absolutely, I was lost to the Civil War after I got that book. I devoured it, began buying other Civil War books, and got Catton's other books, his Army of the Potomac trilogy, I had one grandmother who early on figured out the easiest thing to buy for me was Civil War books, and she started when I was 11. For birthdays and Christmas, I had Douglas Southall Freeman's, Lee's Lieutenants. Anyway, I had about 200 books by the time I got to high school, 200 Civil War books.
Well, that sounds really cool, and I feel like most of us can say too that American Heritage book got us interested. I know for me, the maps, I remember as a little kid looking through them, and you
David
get lost.
Greenspan's picture maps of the battlefields. They were just, there's nothing else like them even now. I know we've moved, probably they're hopelessly retro for young people now, but they were magical to me, those maps. Just incredible. Just incredible.
For sure. And now when you were growing up, did you feel like, the Civil War history was going to be your niche? That's where you wanted to go in terms of professionally and whatnot?
Well, in my part of Colorado, I can say that there wasn't a great deal of interest in the Civil War. There was one lawyer in town who was interested, and he kind of took me under his wing at one point, and we would talk about the Civil War. The nearest battlefield was Glorieta Pass, which was about 3 hours away outside Santa Fe. So my heart was in Virginia, and that's what my real interest was. That's what I read about all the time. That's what I would, it was certainly my world growing up, but it wasn't anybody else's I was growing up around. My high school teacher used to put, high school American history teacher would put special sections on the exams. At the bottom, it would say for Gallagher only, and I would have to answer. He had me teach about the Civil War when I was a junior in high school. I taught about the Civil War. So that's the path I was on, but I didn't know what I didn't imagine when I was young that I would end up making my living the way that I ended up making my living.
Wow. Ben, do you want to?
Yeah, I first of all, thank you for being on with us, and it's an honor to speak with you, Gary. Or Dr. Gallagher. I have
no, just Gary. Gary is fine.
Okay. I have admired your work. I'm 45, and I grew up. I'm a little older than Andrew, but I grew up watching you on TV and reading all of your books. And I think your contributions to the field are just they're second to none. And I think you are a national treasure when it comes to the Civil War, because I love how you link both the military and the civilian aspects of it. And I think you are 1,000% right on that. I think you have to blend and marry the two. And so I appreciate that very much. I think many of us have those same kind of entry points to the war where we feel like we're the only one that likes this stuff. And when you meet someone that has that love for it, I know it's just interesting to talk to people that have that same interest. So I grew up in Michigan, far away from all the battlefields as well. And so I'm kind of right there with you. Like, nobody really wanted to talk about this stuff. And so I can totally identify with you. But
you and Bruce Catton share that Michigan background.
Yeah,
we do. And I have all of Bruce Catton's books, the Army of the Potomac trilogy. I read every half a dozen years or anything.
They're amazing.
They are. And that passage that you always talk about the Iron Brigade coming down the field. Yeah, I read that and I'm getting chills down my neck right now thinking about it, because it just captures you.
It does. He sets the scene. He just had a way of setting the scene for things and for dealing with things. The way he deals with the Gettysburg Address, he narrates it. He doesn't quote from the address. Just Lincoln stands up and starts to talk.
Yeah.
The way he handles Appomattox from the soldier's point of view. He just had an absolute gift for evoking a time and place. He really did. And I think his works hold up for things that were basically written between 1949 and 1953.
Yeah.
They hold up amazingly well. They're a little anachronistic in some ways, but for the most part, they're well worth reading now, and way better than most of the stuff that's being written now about the war. You really can't go wrong with Catton still, I think.
And when you think of both, I think him and Freeman, they were operating with, less than what we have now as far as the manuscript material.
There wasn't even, the common soldier literature at the time Bruce Catton was writing was Bell Wiley's Life of Johnny Reb. Life of Billy Yank hadn't even come out yet until the very end of the Army of the Potomac project. So it was but they were both. I mean, Freeman had a PhD from Johns Hopkins and was trained more rigorously that way than Catton. But both of them could write well. They wrote very differently. Catton didn't start sentences with adverbs the way that Freeman loved to do. But
Right.
but both could really write, and just pulled you into the war.
Yeah.
Pulled me into it.
My first question, I think, is kind of a broad one. You've been at this your entire career, and you got into it as probably primarily interested in the military aspect, I'm sure, right?
Entirely.
Yeah. How has there been a military aspect of the war that you went into this field thinking one thing and now feel another, or a complete opposite idea as to when you got into versus now? From a military, like a battle or a controversy or something.
Well, when I was young, I thought, because everything I read told me it was so, that Gettysburg was the great turning point of the war, and I quit thinking that a long time ago.
Okay.
Grant has levitated up and up and up in my estimation as I've gotten older. I mean, I knew Grant was a good soldier when I was young and just starting out, but I didn't really appreciate a lot of the dimensions of Grant as a leader, how perceptive he was, how resolute he was, how unflappable he was. I mean, Grant, there aren't many people who've consistently become more attractive and more impressive figures to me as I've gotten older. Lincoln is one, Grant is another one. I've changed my mind on almost everything. I mean, the one thing the main thing I've learned as a historian over all these years is that however much I thought I knew about something and however complicated I thought something was, once I really dig into it, it's more complicated than I thought it was, and probably different than I thought it was. And that's not how we like our history in the United States now. We like it really simple. Who are the good guys? Who are the bad guys? Who should I like? Who should I hate? Give me the 30-second soundbite version of everything. And that's just not what history's like.
Right. Do you find that the students that you have taught and tutored in recent years are more into the military aspect or the off the field aspect?
Well, I think that a lot of when I first started to teach at Penn State, most of the students in my Civil War class were men. When I first started to teach at UVA, I would say that 2/3 or 3/4 of the students were men, and the classes were always big and they always filled up. But over the course of just a few years in each instance, they came to be about half and half, men and women. And at the end at Virginia, a majority were women. I think a lot of the men who initially came to these classes probably were introduced to the war the same way I was. They read about generals, they read about battles, and the other side of the war is something they needed to learn about. A lot of the women who came would have had they would have been more interested in non-military things in the beginning. And part of my job was always to get them to understand that you have to bring those two things together or you can't understand the Civil War. I mean, the academic Civil War still is overwhelmingly non-military. Most academics do not like military history. They don't really respect military history, and you can take a course on the Civil War at a lot of colleges and basically never go to a battle, never hear a shot fired, no gunpowder, they're interested in everything but military things. And most of the kind of lay readers in the Civil War, I think, still come to it mainly through military things and aren't really that interested in non-military things. So I think it's been one of my main goals through my whole career is to try to bridge that gap and get those two different groups to appreciate the other side as you go along. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't.
Do you think that trend is irreversible now in the academy?
Well, I haven't seen it reversed in many decades. I think there's been a little bit of movement on the academic side. And academics, of course, will always say, of course, we appreciate the military history side. And I would just say, well, no, you don't. I mean, look at the journals. Look what's written about in the journals. Now the common soldiers have gotten a lot more attention than they used to. There's a big common soldier literature now that is developed. It really took off in the late 80s and 90s and has continued to be very vigorous, I think. But for the most part, I don't think those two worlds have come together yet. And I don't know. And if they don't, they don't. You can lead a perfectly full life being interested in the Civil War and only looking at one side or the other side. I just think if your goal is to really understand the war, you have to bring them together, or you can't understand the war.
Go ahead, Andrew. I'll yield the floor for a moment.
Yeah, and I'll be honest with you, Gary, too, when you hit it right on the head, when you start getting into Civil War history, you focus on, the Stonewall Jacksons, the Abraham Lincolns, but then when you get older, for me, I'm a Michigander as well, and I've been wanting to study what Michigan did, which they did well for the war effort, but I'm also diving into my family ancestry now, to finding which relatives of mine served in either army. And I know there were men on both sides that from my family that served, but what is the common misconception that you've seen while teaching on the Civil War?
Oh, I think there are a number of fairly basic and very widely held misconceptions. One is that Gettysburg was the turning point. I mean, I deal with that's a little one, a specific one. I've done a lot of work with high school teachers and to a lesser degree middle school teachers. I've taught hundreds and hundreds of them over the years, and there are state standards that have that as a question. What's the turning point of the Civil War? And the answer is the Battle of Gettysburg.
Yep.
And they ask me how to deal with that, and I tell them to tell their students, here's a life lesson for you. Here's the question. Here's the answer that will help you, but it's not the correct answer. You just need to know it's not the correct answer. Go ahead and give the incorrect answer because it will help you going forward. Just be aware that it isn't. I think one of the most widely held misconceptions of the war is that United States victory was inevitable and that emancipation was inevitable. And of course, neither one of those things is true. I think it's part of what I call the Appomattox syndrome, which is starting at the end of the story and knowing everything we know about the end of the story. And then, so of course, the United States won. Slavery was killed. Those things were obviously inevitable. They happened. Now let's go back and see what points toward those things and sort of construct our narrative in that way. I think that's those. And it's always been interesting to me that a lot of the people who are very interested in emancipation, in effect, link arms with the Lost Cause people there, because the Lost Cause guys after the war said, well, we lost because we never could have won that war. Yankees had too much of everything. It's not what they were saying during the war, but it's what they said after the war. So I think that is a very common misconception about the war. Emancipation's inevitability is another one. There's also one moving into the early post-war years, the notion that somehow the white loyal citizenry stepped away from a commitment that they had made to full equal rights for freed people. I think that's another major misconception. I don't think there was ever a commitment to that. I think for the loyal citizenry, it was always mainly a war about union. Became a war about union and emancipation. That's two things. The end of the war, check. We did both. There's not a third thing on their list. Save the union, kill slavery, make sure black people get full equal rights. That third one was never there. And I think coming to terms with that, we wish it had been otherwise, but it wasn't. Coming to terms with that makes Reconstruction intelligible, I think. Yep. There's no lost moment of potential racial equality, I think, because there's what it would have taken to achieve that simply wasn't there. A sense that something was left undone and a willingness to deploy military forces over the long term in the former Confederacy to make certain that you got that. That wasn't there either.
You gave a phenomenal lecture, I think, out in California on the lost moment at Reconstruction.
Right.
Some years ago. And I have to tell you, it's one of my favorite lectures that I've ever seen on the internet. And I've watched them all. And it wasn't even about, the battlefield stuff, which I'm more interested in as a historian.
Uh-huh.
But I thought it was just a wonderful lecture. And if anybody wants to learn about Reconstruction, I would point them in the direction of that lecture. And I think your thesis there was basically that, like you just said, the war was won, check. Slavery is done. And we did that as a way to kind of punish the South and to remove this thing that was
and
dividing
restore the union. It's all about union, for most of the white citizenry. Now, there some, I don't know what percentage. Let's be generous and say 10% of the white North. I think that's too high. Would have really cared. Yeah, black men should get the vote and so forth. I mean, even the states in the North weren't allowing black men to vote. So that sort of tells us they weren't that concerned about it. Only 5 states let black men vote at the beginning of the Civil War, 5 of the New England states, and a bunch of other states voted it down over the next few years. So if you understand that, Reconstruction doesn't become a lost moment. To me, it becomes this sort of amazing moment where a population, an overwhelmingly white population, that doesn't really care about black people, nonetheless gives us the 14th and 15th Amendments, which down the road really make a difference. So it's just a different way to look at it, I think.
It's also struck me that, there was so little violence after Appomattox.
Relatively, yes.
Relatively, yes. I mean, it amazes me that we killed each other in scores the way we did during those 4 years, and that the war pretty much, when it was over, besides obviously the racial violence in the post-war.
Sure.
But it amazes me that these 2 warring sections just stopped. If you could speak on that, maybe.
Well, I will speak on that. There was this notion that the Reconstruction was just a continuation of the war by other means. I don't buy that either. It's on such a different scale. There's a lot of post-war violence, especially race-related violence. There are really ugly episodes in Memphis and in New Orleans. There's a tremendous amount of voter intimidation of black potential voters and white unionists. All of that's true. But when you compare it to the level of violence during the war, it to me doesn't make sense to pretend that this is still just the war being carried on by other means. It just isn't. The goals are different. The white South, if they'd had their way, they would have kept slavery and they would have been a nation. Well, they know they're not going to get slavery back. They know they're not going to be a nation, so they scale back their goals, and what they want to do is maintain white supremacy. And they do end up doing that. And Jim Crow is sort of the most obvious evidence of how they succeeded long term. It wasn't even clear they'd succeed in that. They did succeed in that in long term, but that's so different from the goal of establishing a slaveholding republic. The whole thing has changed in the aftermath. And I just think it's a mistake to pretend the war just keeps going on. The level of violence is so different. People lose sight of the fact, I think, that for most of the loyal white citizenry, the goal is to put the union created by the founders back together. The war, and that only is going to happen if you let the former Confederate states back in. Doesn't mean you have to love all of them. The fact that the white South acted badly in the summer of 1865, with a big assist from Andrew Johnson in the White House, explains, I think, why the white North went as far as it did. It's why we got a 14th Amendment. It's why we got a 15th Amendment, because the white South was acting like they didn't lose. And that was something the loyal citizenry wouldn't put up with. You lost. You need to behave like you lost. And we don't really care about black people. We'll let you order your race relations, but you're not going to do some of these other things that you're doing because you lost the war.
The Southern people made a series of very bad miscalculations from 1860 to 1866.
Nobody's made of. I mean, what bigger irony is there in United States history than the irony of what happened with these guys who said, let's get out of the Union to protect slavery, which would have lasted probably 40 years, 50 years if there hadn't been a war. And in 4 years, it's dead. And 30% of their white military age males are dead, and their economy's in a shambles. I mean, talk about a gamble that went wrong. We want to protect slavery. Oops, we lost it in 4 years when we would have had it. I mean, Lincoln said 50 years. I don't think it's unreal. I think we would have gotten rid of it. We would have been last. We would have been later than Brazil. We would have been later than Spanish Cuba, because it was thriving here in the 1860s.
I'm going to ask you a fun question here. What is your favorite battlefield and your favorite spot on a battlefield?
Yeah. I get asked that a lot. I don't really have a favorite battlefield. I've spent tons of time on so many of them. I mean, I love Antietam because there's few modern intrusions there. On Antietam, my favorite part of the tours I would give there is when I would walk groups into the Westwoods and then through the Westwoods to the 15th Massachusetts Monument, that rampant lion monument that overlooks the old Hagerstown Pike, and talk there, use that monument and the very high number of killed and mortally wounded. I have good quotations about how one of the men who was killed there was buried and how his father came back and could find where he was buried. That's one of my favorite parts of any battlefield. But I love taking students to Chancellorsville and all kinds of other groups. Gettysburg's irresistible. It's a wonderful place and a hideous place in my view. I mean, there's no schlock that is not for sale in Gettysburg. It's overrun by people who want to go on ghost tours, for God's sake. That's a dumb thing that wasn't there when I first went to Gettysburg. But there are also places on the Gettysburg. I love to take, in my version of the walk to do the Pickett Pettigrew assault, I like to walk them up the Spangler Lane so they'll get some sense of how far down the right flank of the Confederates were, then all back along the ridge to Porter Alexander's guns. And I mean, I love to do that. That's fun to make people think about Pickett's charge as not just going from the Virginia Monument to the Meade Equestrian Monument, but it's so much more complicated than that.
I take my tours. I start down the Spangler Lane too, and I always start a group from the Virginia Monument, and then I start a group from the Spangler Lane. And it's interesting that, the charge only lasted about 18 to 20 minutes.
Yep. Well, and they can't even see. I mean, if you're down there by Spangler, you can't even see the road. You can't see Cemetery Ridge. You can't see any of that. I mean, it's so totally different than it is for the North Carolinians who were over beyond the Spangler Woods, where they, as soon as they march 50 yards to their front, they're looking right at Cemetery Ridge and realize what they're going to have to do. It's so different on the right, just completely different, completely. And they go farther north than they do east in the assault.
Yeah.
James, do you got anything at all?
Well, I've been in and out, so I don't even know what's been covered. But
fire away. If we've already covered it, we'll tell you we've covered it and ask for another question.
Yeah.
Perfect. So while we're on the topic of Gettysburg, I know I've seen several of your lectures kind of dealing with this topic, but maybe we can talk about it for the audience.
What if Stonewall Jackson had been at Gettysburg?
Yes, exactly.
I'd love to have a $10 bill for every time someone is asked. I really would take you all to dinner at a really fancy restaurant and have a lot of money left over.
Well, yeah, that's one of them. But so as far as the true turning point of the American Civil War, if there was a singular one, I think Hollywood has kind of geared everyone towards Gettysburg as the turning point. There's a lot of publicity about that. It's a very publicized battle. Some people tend to believe that maybe Vicksburg and Gettysburg combined in the summer of '63 was, that point that kind of shifted momentum towards the Union. Do you agree with this sentiment, or do you think there was a event or events that maybe had a bigger impact on the war itself?
I think Gettysburg wouldn't make my top 6 or 7 turning points of the war. It certainly wasn't as important as Vicksburg in July of 1863. Vicksburg had far greater impact in both the Confederacy and the United States. But even Vicksburg, I mean, what did Vicksburg actually do? The Mississippi River ceased to be a Confederate river when New Orleans fell. If you don't control New Orleans, the Mississippi is not a Confederate river. And New Orleans is gone in April of 1862. That's when the Mississippi River is no longer a Confederate river. Now, Vicksburg closes that last little bit that they controlled. That's the stretch from Port Hudson on up. Okay, so and psychologically it's important because Winfield Scott had talked about it in the Anaconda Plan. People had a sense of that. So it's just much more important than Gettysburg in the summer of '63. But if we had been able to poll people in the summer of '64 all across the loyal states and said, well, things look a little grim now. Atlanta hasn't fallen. Richmond hasn't fallen. That Overland campaign, pretty bloody. But Gettysburg, we know, was the turning point. They would have looked at us and said, what are you talking about? Gettysburg was a year ago. Gettysburg has nothing to do with what's going on now. And Vicksburg, what are you just stop the nonsense. The moment of greatest peril for the United States, unquestionably, was in July and August 1864, which is long past the point most people, including most academics, think, well, the wars are, Confederate defeat is inevitable. I mean, Lincoln doesn't think he's going to be reelected. His blind memorandum to the cabinet, the newspapers don't. And what reelects him, of course, are two commanders, and it's not Grant. Grant didn't reelect Lincoln. If it had just been up to Grant in the Overland campaign, Lincoln would not have been reelected. But Sherman delivered in early September, and Sheridan delivered between mid-September and mid-October, and the Democrats got crushed in the November election. So I would say Atlanta is far more important than Gettysburg as a turning point. I think the 64 Shenandoah Valley campaign it often gets lost. It's not just Atlanta, it's Sheridan in the Valley too. But the 7 days far more important than Gettysburg, because the 7 days brought Lee to the fore, which changed everything in the war. And because McClellan didn't take Richmond when he absolutely should have, emancipation came on the table. Congress with the Second Confiscation Act, and Lincoln telling his cabinet on the 22nd of July he's going to issue a proclamation of emancipation. Antietam's not the key battle for emancipation. The 7 days is the one that puts it on the table. Antietam just gives Lincoln a chance to actually tell everybody what he's doing. 7 days, seismic in terms of its impact on the course of the war.
Wow.
Gary, could you explain for our listeners what the blind memorandum was?
Yes, it's a weird thing that Lincoln did.
I've always wondered, why did he do this?
Well, no, I can't answer that. I have no idea what he's up to. It seems silly. He's at a cabinet meeting on the 23rd of August, and he has his cabinet sign a memorandum that they don't read. They all sign it. I've gotten to hold it in my hand. It was great to be able to hold that in my hand. He passed it around, and what he had said was, it looks like we're not going to be reelected. The Democrats are going to be reelected, and we're going to have to win the war before March of 1865, because once the Democrats are in charge, we know they won't win the war. And by that, Lincoln meant put the Union back together. He had them sign that. I don't know exactly why he decided to do that way. It tells us what Lincoln's frame of mind was at that point, is this war it's not going the way we want it to go. It's not.
The cabinet didn't see what he had written on it, and he just told them to sign it as a snapshot in time of what he was thinking
That's right. That's right.
I just never understood why he did that.
I don't understand why he did it either, but to read what everybody's saying, it was clear that at that point morale in the loyal states had bottomed out. And I think part of the reason is that expectations had been so high in the spring of 1864. You've got Grant coming east finally. So our guy is going to go against your guy. And Lee's going to find out that he's been up against the second string. Now he's up against the first string. I mean, both sides the Confederates felt the same way. Yeah, Grant's coming here. We've had people come from the West before. John Pope came from the West and talked about what he was going to do. Grant's never been up against anybody but like Lee. And on the other side, Lee's never been up against anybody like Grant. And they were both right. Yeah. Nobody had been up against that. And what you get is this unbelievable campaign from the first week of May through June 18th, when the losses adjusted for population. Now, I would ask my students, how would we react to news that in a 7-week period, between 700 and 800,000 Americans became casualties? How would we react to that now? We counted casualties in the Middle Eastern wars. The New York Times put a picture of every service person killed in the war, put a picture of all of them. That's about 4 hours dead at Antietam. The scale is so different. It is so different. And the Overland campaign, such high expectations. And then here we are, it's June, then it's July, then it's August. Richmond still hasn't fallen. Atlanta still hasn't fallen. This is, maybe we can't beat the goddamn rebels. I mean, it's not worth it. It's just not worth it.
Right.
We don't like South Carolina anyway. Let them go.
Hey, that's what I wrote my book on. So,
I mean, that was always kind of a mystery. That until I really understood what Union meant to people, it didn't make sense to me. I knew nobody liked South Carolina. They didn't like South Carolina. They didn't like Rhode Island. They're weird. They're both weird. They're always out of step with everybody else. They're nothing but a pain in the ass, both of them. Why not just celebrate when South Carolina leaves instead of saying, we won't tolerate this? We will not tolerate this. We're going to make you come back.
Do you think that an argument could be made that the war actually started when the Star of the West went down to Fort Sumter?
The argument could be made, but to me, the more interesting question is why didn't it? I mean, they actually fired on. Why didn't more happen then? Why didn't that first time? There's not even a Confederacy yet. Then, I mean, we're pre-Confederacy when that happens.
Right.
They haven't gotten to Montgomery yet and written their document using the Constitution as a, just copy it over here and make a few changes. So it's interesting to me why that didn't provoke more response.
I agree.
Now, that was January of 61, right?
That's January of 61, okay. Yes. Okay. Yep, January of 61. You actually fired on it. Yes.
Yeah.
That's the first shot.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
absolutely.
What is your opinion on the way Jefferson Davis handled the war effort as the president of the Confederacy?
I mean, Davis is never going to come out well in comparisons with Abraham Lincoln. Well, let's just accept that. I mean, he's not likable, first of all.
Right.
It's just not. It's really hard to like. Jefferson Davis, he reminds me of Woodrow Wilson, also eminently unlikable, in that his idea of a good discussion is you give me your opinion, I'll give you my opinion. You'll accept my opinion is better than your opinion, and then we'll move on. That's kind of how he did it. He's rigid. He holds grudges. He has my mother. If you ever got on my mother's list, you never got off. It's like a roach trap. You get in, you don't get out. That's the way Jefferson Davis is. Lincoln isn't that way. I would have fun imagining how Davis would have reacted if he'd gone to see Joseph Johnston one night. Johnston wasn't there. Johnston came home and told his butler to tell Davis to go home and he'd see him later. Davis would have had a fit. There would have been a scene. Lincoln didn't make a scene. I think Davis, however, had gifts. I think he did about as well as anybody could have done, actually. I think he got the big picture, and the big picture is it's going to take a national effort. This is a war between nations. This isn't a war between a bunch of states and another nation. We're going to have to marshal our national resources of manpower and economic resources and it's going to take a major intrusion from the central state to do this if we have any chance of winning this war. And he and Lee were exactly on the same page there, which is one reason that they got along quite well. And didn't get along with the ardent state rights people who said, we can't have conscription, we can't do this, we can't do that. And Davis would have said, well, then we can't win the war if we don't do those things. So I think he got that. But I think he wasn't willing. I mean, he's a West Pointer. He'd commanded more men in battle than anybody who led an army on either side during the war. And I think he tried to be his own general-in-chief and commander-in-chief for most of the war. And I think that's one hat too many. He shouldn't have done that. They didn't make Lee general-in-chief until January of 65, by which time it didn't matter.
What do you think happens if Joe Johnston is not wounded outside of...
I think Richmond falls and the war's over. War's over in the summer of 62. With slavery still intact, because it was still intact then. There'd been, a handful of enslaved people had made their way to Union lines by then, but there's no Second Confiscation Act yet. There's nothing from the White House yet. The great hero of the war would have been George B. McClellan, and his vision of Union is the Union as it was. I mean, I can't imagine the Confederacy surviving the loss of Richmond, which would have happened because Johnston would retreat. I mean, he did love to retreat. Every day is a good day to retreat. He'd retreated almost all the way to Richmond by the time he is shot. McClellan could certainly lay siege to a place because it didn't involve movement. So he had a guy who loved to retreat. He's good at laying siege to a place. I think Richmond would have fallen. And in combination with everything that had gone on out west, which was catastrophic, I don't think the Confederacy could have survived the loss of their capital. I think the war would have ended in the summer of 62 with slavery intact.
With slavery intact and none of the things that followed, obviously. What does that look like, in your opinion, as a reunification of the country? Do you think it goes easier or less easy?
I don't think there would have been a reunification. Oh, you mean what would there have been the equivalent of Reconstruction at the end of that kind of? I think that it would have gone much smoother because you don't have the great racial dilemma at the heart of what's going on. I mean, you're probably not going to force the white South to come to terms with their need in the end to let black men vote and such things. I don't think that would have happened if the war had ended in the summer of 62. Lincoln said in 1861 at one point, it wouldn't become a remorseless revolutionary struggle. And putting slavery on the table makes it a remorseless revolutionary struggle because the entire social fabric of the Confederacy is now on the line. That hadn't happened yet in June 1862.
If everyone's good with it, we can each ask one more question to Gary.
I can't believe 42 minutes are gone already. That's gone very quickly.
I know. We'll have to. What that means is we'll have to have you back on. But one of the things that I really enjoy is I spent a lot of my summer and breaks and spring break vacations going to Virginia and Gettysburg, all to the different Civil War battlefields. And one thing that I really am a big supporter on is battlefield preservation, which you were heavily involved with. What was one battlefield story that comes to mind? What a success story, we'll call it.
I'll tell you an early one. I mean, a very small group of us got together in a living room in Fredericksburg, Virginia in the late 80s and started the Association for the Preservation of Civil War Sites. It's a terrible name. It's long and nobody APQUIS. The acronym doesn't work well. We call it APQUIS. I still have an old license plate from Pennsylvania that says APCWS number 1.
APCWS. I remember.
Yeah. Still on my wall over there. We were leading a tour, a group of us, Bob Crick and Will Green and Dennis Fry and I did lots of battlefield tours together in the 80s and 90s. And we were in the Valley and we were doping out a tour for the 64 Valley campaign. And we were walking on the Fisher's Hill battlefield. And we ran into a person who told us that we got to talking and a little bit about who we were and so forth, and said that there might be a piece of ground for sale there. And it ended up being about 200 acres. It was right where Dodson Ramser's division was, and Ramser I'd written my dissertation about in my first book. The key ground on the Confederate left for the Battle of Fisher's Hill, where George Crook came off Little North Mountain and crushed the Confederate left. We ended up purely through serendipity, with no real intention of doing it when we were first there, finding a way to acquire the first big piece of ground that we got as a preservation group came in the course of getting ready for a battlefield tour at Fisher's Hill, excuse me. That was big fun.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, think of the groundwork that laid for future preservation. So
it's really, to me, it's unbelievable where that. I mean, I think the trust is up to about 60,000 acres now. It's really, we gave so many tours to members of Congress and White House staff, and Jim Jeffords, a senator from Vermont, was a big help because he was interested in Vermonters at Cedar Creek and Vermonters at Gettysburg. It was really something. It was really something. It started with a bunch of us kind of doing it with our left hand. I was teaching at Penn State then, and others were National Park Service employees who had to be careful because it didn't want to seem like it's all very complicated. But no one would have guessed that it would turn into what it's turned into. It's really immensely gratifying to see what the trust has done. Unbelievable, really.
I wanted to ask for a final question, Gary. In all of your career, which has been so wonderful and prestigious in this field, is there one honor or one event or one person that you've met where you said, to yourself, this is like a high point of my career? I know that's hard to ask, but
I've had lots of high points of that kind, and I've gotten lots of nice feedback over the years for lots of things. But I think one, UVA, the University of Virginia, doesn't do many things in the rotunda at UVA. It's kind of a big deal to have an event there. And they had a retirement thing for me there when I stepped down at UVA, invited former graduate students from all over the place, who were many of whom several of whom even held chairs of their own at that point, and had an evening in the rotunda that when my grandson was there and my family and my nieces and my brother, that was a real high point. It really and truly was. It was just big fun to see all these people of all different kinds that I had been involved with over many, many, many years all come together in one place. It was really memorable. Big fun.
Well, I guess I'll close it out. I guess for the audience, like anything, there's embellishment the further away you get removed from the event, or, the truth gets skewed. Are there any, maybe one or two surface level myths that you can debunk for us real quick and for the audience that just really drive you nuts?
You mean surface level myths about the Civil War?
Yeah, like myths that this won't seem to go away.
Okay, Grant was a butcher. Grant just didn't care. I mean, I finally at some point sat down and just toted up casualties. And the number that I've come to use with teachers and others is that in all of Grant's great battles before the Overland Campaign, Vicksburg, Henry and Donelson, Shiloh, Chattanooga, all of them in the West, his total casualties were 35,000. Lee's casualties during that same period were 90,000.
Mhm.
90,000. Grant became a bloody general at the same point. Everybody else in the East became a bloody general when they ran into Robert. You can't hang around Robert E. Lee and not have piles of casualties.
Yeah.
Lee is the bloodiest general in U.S. history in terms of the percentage of his men who got shot. Joe Glatar's great book on Lee's army has the best statistical sampling of any book written about any army during the war. And Joe concluded, or his numbers, his data suggest that if you're a soldier in Lee's army, and you never get out of the army in the Confederacy because they keep changing the rules. They first you might have a 3-year enlistment, then you're in longer, then you're in for the duration. Once they got you in a uniform, you never got out. You got a 73% chance of becoming a casualty in the Army. 73% in the Army in Northern Virginia. There's nothing even remotely that close. No,
is that just combat, or is that counting disease as well?
No, that's counting. That's not just combat. That's okay. Counting disease as well. But the number of wounded, of course, is higher than the number of killed, and that also includes prisoners of war. So it's casualties. It's casualties. But 73%, kind of, and it's really dangerous to be a general if you're a general in the Civil War. As well. So I think I hate to just hammer on, I think the myths, that is one of them. And I sound like a broken record here. The other one, the one thing I really would try to get people to quit thinking was true was that after Gettysburg, Confederates just got out their calendars, flipped ahead, circled April 9th, 1865, and just started crossing off days. Lee, okay, we know it's going to be over. Now 213 days to go, 212 days to go. We know it's inevitable. We know there's nothing we can do about it because of Gettysburg.
The book I just had published, I wrote a regimental history on the 12th South Carolina out of AP Hill's Corps. And of the 150 that were left at Appomattox, there were only a handful that had not been wounded at all during the war.
A handful. You wrote about them. Sometime we can do this the next time we get together. I'd love to know where AP Hill was during the Battle of Gettysburg for much of the time. He just disappears. He disappears.
That was our last program I did.
Yeah, last week.
I mean, the question was, I know where Richard Ewell is. I know where James Longstreet is. I know where Jeb Stuart is. He should have been here sooner, but I know but where the hell is AP Hill? That's what I want to know after July 1st. I asked Bud Robertson that once, and I said, Bud, I read your biography of AP Hill, and I can't even figure out after I read your biography where the hell AP Hill was for much of the Battle of Gettysburg. And Bud said, well, he couldn't really either. I think Lee figured out. I think Gettysburg put huge question marks in Lee's mind about 2/3 of his corps commanders. I think he knew how good Stuart was. He was unhappy with Stuart.
Yeah.
Gettysburg didn't affect his view of Stuart, didn't affect his view of James Longstreet either, although I think he was probably a little put off with him. But Ewell, he wrote Ewell off after Gettysburg, I think, and then pushed him out of the army early in the Overland Campaign. But I think he really started to worry about Hill too.
So this is the last question for me. All right. I have to know. And I've heard you speak on Longstreet's performance at Gettysburg a number of times, and I feel like you've gone back and forth on whether he was a good subordinate or not. Could you talk a little bit about that?
I think Longstreet was a superb corps commander, and I think Lee knew that, and I think Lee relied that the notion. Another myth is that Lee didn't really trust Longstreet. He would go to Longstreet's camp just to keep an eye on him. He didn't have to do that with Jackson. No, he went to Longstreet's camp because Longstreet's people behaved like human beings. If you went to Stonewall Jackson's camp, but you'd sit around and just pray that the old man would go to bed so that you could have a drink and talk and smoke and have some fun. Longstreet was not a good subordinate on July 2nd at Gettysburg, I don't think. I think he was making a point and then pretending later he gets down around the Union left and pretends that he doesn't have the authority to adjust to circumstances. He knows that's not true. He knows that Lee gave his subordinates. I mean, Jackson had done the same thing at Chancellorsville. Got to the Plank Road. Oops, it'll be better to go to the Turnpike. Okay, I'm going to go to the Turnpike and we'll attack down there. So I don't think he was being a good subordinate there. I think for the most part, he was a very good subordinate. I think he'd reached his level of competency. I don't think he would have made a good, I mean, his record at Knoxville is not anything you'd want to put on your CV.
Awful.
So I think he's a very good soldier. I don't think he was being a good subordinate on July 2nd at Gettysburg.
All right. Well,
this
Mr.
was
Gallagher,
enjoyable, gentlemen. Thanks for the invitation. Down the road again after you've had lots of other people and are ready for a rerun. Let's do it again.
Oh,
Perfect.
yeah. We're definitely going to have you on. Again, there's there's so much more information we can dive into.
Sounds good.
Yes.
Subscribe now to the Distant Drums podcast and march with us from Fort Sumter to Appomattox, because history doesn't just echo, it marches on.